All right, let's jump right in. Today, we are doing a crash course on the banking world, specifically designed to give you the edge you need to land that data science job in 2026. This is all about sounding less like a fresh graduate and more like an industry pro. Let's do this. So, are you picturing yourself as a data analyst, a risk modeler, maybe a fraud specialist at a big name like JP Morgan or HSBC? If that's you, you are in exactly the right place. Because look, your technical skills are a given, right? But what's really going to set you apart is understanding the business. And let's be real for a second. Banks aren't just buildings with money. They are gigantic, complex data machines. So what we're going to do here is give you the fast track to that crucial domain knowledge. No fluff, just the stuff that's going to make recruiters' ears perk up in 2026. Okay, first things first, we've got to nail the fundamentals. You need to know what a bank actually does day to day. And maybe even more important, you need to know what keeps bankers up at night, because that's the foundation for pretty much every data science project you'll ever work on. So banking isn't just one giant thing. It's really split into three main areas. First, you've got retail banking. That's for everyday people, us. It's all about checking accounts, credit cards, mortgages. Then there's commercial banking, which does the same for businesses. And finally, the big one, investment banking. That's where the massive deals happen, like mergers and IPOs. Knowing the difference helps you figure out where you want to be. Now here's the key. No matter which part of the bank you're in, every single one is completely obsessed with managing risk. I mean, it's their entire business model. And it all boils down to these three big categories, which, by the way, are an absolute goldmine for data science projects. First up is credit risk. This is the big one, the classic. It's all about one simple question. Will someone pay back their loan? You know all those classification models you've been building? Logistic regression, XGBoost? This is their natural habitat. You're literally on the front lines, managing one of the bank's biggest financial headaches. Next, we have market risk. This is all about what happens when the market goes haywire. Think stock prices suddenly crashing or interest rates spiking. Data scientists in this space build really sophisticated models like value at risk, or VAR. It's a fancy way of answering the question, hey, what's the absolute most money we could lose on this portfolio in the next 30 days? Pretty important stuff. And third is operational risk. Now this one's a huge bucket. It covers basically anything else that can go wrong. A computer system fails, someone makes a huge mistake, or, and this is a big one for data science, an external event like fraud or a cyber attack happens. This whole area is super heavily regulated and a massive focus for AI. Speaking of regulations, here's a pro tip. If you want to sound like you really know your stuff, you need to be aware of Basel III and IV. These are basically the global rulebooks that force banks to be safer. The buzzword for 2026 is the output floor. It just means regulators are putting a limit on how much banks can rely on their own internal models, the ones you'll be building. Dropping that term in an interview, it shows you get that your work fits into a much bigger, regulated picture. That's a huge plus. Okay, so we know what banks are scared of. Now for the fun part. Let's talk about where your skills come in to save the day and solve these massive problems. This is your playground. This is where you get to shine. Probably the most common way for a data scientist to get into a bank is through fraud detection. The goal is simple but incredibly hard. Spot the one bad transaction in millions of good ones, and do it in real time. It's a classic anomaly detection problem, and the impact is massive. HSBC, for instance, uses AI to cut down on false alarms by about 60%. That means way fewer annoyed customers and a much safer bank. The second major field is credit risk modeling. This is the bread and butter. You're building models to predict things like the probability of default. And while old school models are still around, the trend is definitely toward more powerful stuff like gradient boosting and even neural nets. What's really cool is the new trend of using alternative data, like how someone uses their phone to give a credit score to people without a long financial history. And hey, the party doesn't stop there. There's also customer analytics, predicting who might leave the bank. There's anti-money laundering, or AML, where you get to use cool stuff like network analysis to find criminal rings. And the really cutting-edge stuff? Using generative AI to help automate the mountains of paperwork banks have to file for regulators. So you know the problems, you know the applications, but what tech are you actually going to use day to day to build all this? Let's talk about the tech stack you need to know for 2026. But before we list out the software, I want to pause here for just a second. Seriously, burn this into your brain. The tech is just a tool. It's the combination of your machine learning skills with the domain knowledge we've been talking about that makes you the candidate they just can't say no to. All right, here's the stack. For languages, it's Python and SQL. Period. It's not a negotiation. You have to know both cold. When you're dealing with insane amounts of data, you'll be using something like Spark. But the most critical takeaway here, the thing that is an absolute must-have in banking, is explainability. Regulators demand to know why your model denied someone a loan. So tools like SHAP and Lime, they're not just nice to have, they are mandatory. Okay, you've got the knowledge, you know the tools. Let's put it all together. Let's talk about how you walk into that interview and prove you're the expert they've been looking for. So, picture this. You're in the hot seat. The hiring manager leans forward and hits you with this question. It's a classic test. They want to see how you think, not just what you know. So how do you knock this out of the park? Your perfect answer has 3 parts. First, you state the obvious. Okay, that's a classic imbalanced data problem. Second, you talk tech. You mention techniques like SMOT, or why you'd use a metric like the precision recall AUC. But here's the killer third point, the mic drop. You say, and of course, for regulatory review, we'd have to use a tool like SHAP to explain exactly why any transaction was flagged. Boom. You just proved you understand their world. And don't forget, an interview is a two-way street. When they inevitably ask, so do you have any questions for us? This is not a formality. This is your chance to flip the script and show you're already thinking on their level. So don't ask about company culture. Hit them with something like this. I'm curious, how is your team preparing for the implementation of the Basel IV output floor in your credit risk models? Or maybe, what does your current MLOps process look like for getting models into production and monitoring them? A question like that immediately changes the dynamic. You sound like a colleague, not a candidate. And finally, your secret weapon, your portfolio. You have to have proof you can do the work. Don't show them a random project, show them something relevant. A credit card fraud detection project using a Kaggle dataset? Perfect. A loan default prediction model? Yes. These projects speak the exact language of the job you're applying for. So let's wrap it up. You now get it. You understand the core risks, the key applications, and the regulatory world that banks live in. That right there is the knowledge that puts you leagues ahead of most other graduates. You're not just a coder anymore. You're a problem solver who gets the business. Look, the entire world of banking is being completely transformed by data, and they are desperate for people who can bridge that gap between the technology and the business goals. The only real question left is, are you ready to be one of them? Now go out there and crush those interviews. Good luck.